This is the Be Helpful Podcast, where conversations with budding entrepreneurs prepare you for the wild journey of building a business or side hustle. I'm Boy Adebayo, and we're about to jump back into our conversation with Ravi Kurani, the founder of Sutro. As you learned last week, Sutro is a water sensing robot. It's a pretty cool hardware tech company that Ravi started, grew, and now is continuing to grow within a company that purchased him about 5 years ago. Really great guy, just really open, has a ton of experience. He also, in a previous life, worked kind of in the VC space. So as he talks about fundraising, he's going to share a little bit of kind of inside baseball, as well as his experience as a founder himself. Another part of this conversation I really enjoyed was Ravi's principles, I should say, around unattachment and acceptance and how that comes into play as a entrepreneur. And then lastly, we talk about Excel. And you guys know that I love my financial models and my Excel spreadsheets. But Ravi tells us about how useless they can be. I joke. And more about how inaccurate they can be. And also he gives some really good feedback and thoughts on how to make them useful, because there is a place for them. So again, great conversation. I'll shut up. I'll let you enjoy and leave a review letting us know what you learned at the end of it. Thanks. So you've been running Sutro, 7 years now? Is that correct?
It's about 7 years, 8 years, something like that.
7 years. And when did you guys get acquired?
We got acquired 5 years ago now.
5 years. So talk to me a little bit about that process and that experience, because this is your baby.
Yeah.
How did that kind of, not only kind of physically, how did that happen and how did it work, but then internally as someone that, you probably were thinking, hey, this is going to be a multi-billion-dollar company. Like, how did you deal with that?
Yeah. So the kind of first question you asked of like the process, we were in the middle of raising some strategic financing, kind of leading up to our Series A. And, very, very simply, one of the strategics basically said, hey, it might just be a better option, instead of us funding a part of this larger thing, to kind of just, acquire you. There was also, to be honest, a deal that also fell through. So a little bit of founder drama in there too, but I won't dig deep too much into that. And so, things just kind of popped in at the right place in the right time. And, with that being said, I don't think it necessarily changes anything on my vision, notably because Sandy Mark, the company that acquired us in Canada, has a parallel vision, right? They see eye to eye with me in building this thing out for the pool industry. They themselves are a sanitation company that has verticals in food and beverage and janitorial in hospitals. And so, why not work with a large distributor that already makes chemicals in these markets to help me not only see the pool market, but see it scale horizontally into all these other markets as well. And so we were very much aligned. And, nothing against VCs. I like, honestly, my hats to them. Like, I'm super, super gracious for all of the VCs that invested in us. But there's also a beauty in being so close to a strategic that has financing that also understands the end to end of your business model, right? Because VCs, and I know this because I had a VC hat on, it's really, really tough, even if you focus on a particular area like deep tech or hardware, building like a smart breast pump, right, which was one of my friend's companies, versus a water sanitation company for swimming pools versus a smart water bottle, are three very separate markets that all have three very separate distribution strategies and three separate products. And so, I mean, not that any three of these are bad investments, but as a VC focusing one person on three separate ideas or many separate ideas, it just becomes really, really problematic. From an entrepreneur standpoint, to get feedback from a funder that can kind of resonate with you. And so there's pros and cons, right? Honestly, I think if I can argue the opposite point of, it's also great to kind of, not have the management side of a large company, or, somebody from the management team that's kind of guiding product direction. Whereas if I had a
Hmm.
little bit more autonomy with the VC or investor side, I might be able to make decisions a little bit more, lean or quickly. And so I don't think there's like one size fits all, one's better than the next. But the kind of end of it again was like they saw eye to eye with the vision of the company and the vision of what I wanted to do. And honestly, I'm super gracious for them for kind of leading us to this point. And so, yeah, that's kind of it's the process of how we got there, and then how it's been.
Yeah. No, that's really cool because I think that the thing that I really key on that you said is the importance of aligned vision and partnership, right? This just alignment of, hey, this is where I want to go, and this is where they would like to go, and what they do, and it kind of works well together. I think that that's really important because there's there's nothing more, you know, there's a game there's no game that I like less than, well, what if someone offered you $10 million or $100 million, or you name the number for your idea? It's like, well, I don't want to put a price on it. Like, I know what it can be, and
Yeah.
I want to kind of build this out. And so it is this challenging thing that, your friends are always going to ask you when you have an idea. And, you know, it does become a little bit of a challenge to like make that decision. I'll put it out there. I always make the comment to say, I want my strategic partner to be Microsoft, for example. I
Mhm.
think it'll be, I know their product suite and how it would perfectly align with us. And like, I would love that. That'd be awesome. Would I want them to buy all of my company? I don't know.
Yeah.
I love it a little too much, right? But
Sure.
I get that. I get that the priority and the importance is that alignment and vision, and then that partnership as well.
And at the end of the day, it goes back to leverage and momentum, right? Your goal is to get
Yeah,
this idea seated in the market and get it in people's hands. And so, whatever the quickest way at the end of the day is to do that, then you kind of go with the, at the path of least resistance. And so I'm not, again, hindsight 2020, I would have never known or made that decision with like looking forward. It's not kind of, you just kind of follow that zigzagging path, and that's kind of where we're at today.
yeah,
And so, yeah, I mean, and honestly, am I grateful and gracious, in the middle of COVID that we had a strategic partner that was helping us fund the hardware? I mean, 100%, man. That would have, a few of my friends over here, it was painful seeing them try to fundraise, working with the
yeah,
team that was entirely flat now because everybody went to video. Like it was crazy. And so,
yeah,
I'm also just really grateful that we got acquired when we did, and then also looking back, the time that we've been through COVID and through the lockdowns and through the supply chain crises, there was a lot getting thrown at us, and then you're a startup to begin with, so like 10x that, right?
yeah, absolutely. So I want to tap a little bit into your VC brain, since you know so space so well. You know, how would you how do you think about money? How do you think about kind of raising money, choosing the right money for your business? Like, given your experience as a VC, how do you tend to think about it? Not only for your business, but then also for, someone that were to ask you, it's like, I have this idea and this is what I'm trying to build.
Yeah, the one thing that I remember, and every VC will say this, the one thing to look for is team, is the people,
Mm,
right? I think at the forefront is the entrepreneur. Um, Mainly being if he or she is not focused on their business, right? If they're doing 10 other things all at once, and this is kind of a little flash in the pan, they're not focused, right? Then again, like kind of like to your baby example, if they have
yeah,
10 different babies running around, like you want to focus on this one thing that you're trying to grow and nurture and get out to the market, and you can't do it without being focused on one thing.
mm,
um, the second thing I would say is founder ego. And I've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs and mentored a ton, during my VC days and also kind of in growing up. And as a founder, you need a certain amount of ego, right? Because you get this imposter syndrome. You're kind of standing there on a stage. You don't really know if this thing you're making is or is not going to work. But there's a point at which that gets dialed up too much very early on in the game, and that can also be detrimental, right? So almost being introspective, looking at where you do stand in that kind of ego complex. And by all means, I'm not saying don't have an ego. Like I get it. As a founder, you're kind of taking a step out there and doing a thing that's never existed before. So you need to have a little bit of an ego. But
Mm-hmm.
tone it down, because it can end up not only being detrimental when you're raising money, but more importantly to your team. If you're trying to build a group of people that are going to trust you as a leader, you're going to end up having way too much churn because people just don't believe in you as a leader, because you're way too busy sitting up on your own high horse for them to even like think about contributing to your idea, because they're like, I don't know if I even want to work with this guy. And so
Right.
those are kind of the two things I would say are like at utmost importance in kind of building or wanting to launch something.
Yeah. How how have you how have you thought about? Let me ask this question: how has your leadership style changed and evolved over the years from starting Sutro to now? Especially given what you said about managing your ego and kind of learning from experience. Like how has it evolved? If you were going to be introspective right now.
Yeah, yeah. I think the first thing I've learned is this concept of unattachment, right? And I think
Mm,
that has come about from the acquisition, from kind of this deal falling through before the acquisition. Um, you necessarily, the world throws way too many things at you, and there's too many variables for you to be able to control yourself. And so a certain level of unattachment is necessary, right? Nobody could have predicted COVID. Nobody could have predicted the outcomes from COVID, right? The fact that we shut. If you were opening up a restaurant in the beginning of COVID, nobody would have told you, hey, for 2 years you're going to literally shut your doors, and the only business you're going to have is DoorDash. Like,
right.
you could have spent all this money on your interior design, and then you would have had zero people stepping into that building because nobody was going out, right? So,
Right.
but it wasn't written in a book anywhere that like, hey, COVID is going to happen at this date at this time, so don't invest in this business because you're going to be better off doing X. All
Right.
bubbling up to this concept of like unattachment, right?
Mm,
Um, which kind of in general allows me a bit of calmness when there is like a lot of things just getting thrown around, because you don't necessarily get attached to a particular thing and hold on to it.
yeah.
And granted, everything I say here has a yin and a yang, right? Like, you don't want to be
Of
too
course.
disattached where you're just like kind of lazy and you're like, I don't care about anything. There
Right.
is a certain tenor, there is a certain like ambition, a certain drive to get to a point, but don't be so like hell bent on it that you're never going to be able to like move to the next thing, right? To be able to pivot. Um,
Yeah.
and then the kind of flip side of that is actually acceptance, right? And I know these are kind of very like broad terms, but unattachment and acceptance. Acceptance means COVID's happening. I spent $1 million on my, interior design of my restaurant, and nobody's going to come in. What do I do now? Let's accept the scenario as it is today, and let's figure out what to do next, right? Which is
Yeah.
like, maybe I need to turn this thing into a ghost kitchen. Maybe I need to figure out how to get on DoorDash. Maybe I need to figure out how to make the food cheaper so people can order it on Grubhub and DoorDash. Whatever it is, don't be so bent on your restaurant and the interior design of it because nobody's going to come in, but figure out how to still make money, stay afloat, and then get the food out there, because at the end of the game, you want people to eat your food as a restaurant, right? So
Right.
those are kind of the two ways that my leadership the style has changed, is in these two kind of factions of unattachment and acceptance.
Yeah. I really appreciate that. Like, there's unattachment. I've got to think and spend some more time on that one because acceptance is one that I've been working on for years. It's like control what you can control, accept the
Mm-hmm.
things that you can't. Um, but the unattachment is, I think there's a lot of wisdom. There's a lot of wisdom in that. And um, you'll fall in love with an idea and you'll do everything you can do in your power to make it come true. But in the event that it's time to pivot, you've got to take the emotion out of it. You've got to dissociate and say, hey, it makes sense to pivot. And I think that there's a lot of wisdom in that.
Yeah, exactly.
This is fun. There's so many kind of like random tangential questions that are popping in my head, that I want to dive into. Um, this is something that I'm curious about. At any point over the 7 years, have you had a sigh of relief or a feeling of less pressure or stress? Or is it just every single day there's just something new that you want to enjoy the small win, but the next day you're just like, all right, now this is a new thing.
Yeah, I don't know if I would define it as relief or stress. Right? I think part of that theory of acceptance is every day is a relief because you're here today, right? Like you've
Yeah,
tackled the challenge of yesterday, and so in a sense that is a relief, right? If you give this kind of
yeah,
definitional angle of it. um but the kind of end of it is like there's just a series of problems, things to solve in front of
yeah,
me, and whether the universe is throwing it at me or the world's throwing it at me, or it's like a business created problem, or it's Silicon Valley Bank literally not having deposit. There's like who would have thought of that, right? Like the startup
right.
world almost crashed because they're like, I can't pay payroll because I can't access my bank. Right? You can be
Yeah,
thinking about everything all in the above, and then you're like, yeah, my bank shut down. So
yeah,
that goes back to acceptance and unattachment, right? Like just
yeah,
today is today. I have to accept the fact that Silicon Valley Bank doesn't have my money. Let's figure out what the feds do and get to that next point. And so is it really relief or stress? I think it's just kind of seeing what's in front of you right now and then attacking the problems that need to get attacked. Um,
yeah,
and those problems obviously become bigger, right? The bigger you get, there's more at stake, there's more risk. But you also need to make sure you're building in more redundancy. You build in more securities, more fail safes. And still the big problems end up happening, right? You get a
right.
COVID event, you get a Silicon Valley Bank event, and there's just no predicting those. It's literally out of your hands. And so yeah, that would kind of be my answer. I know it's like a not like a direct answer to your sigh of relief question, but it's how I
No,
would
it's
answer
it's
it.
it's good, and there's candidly, I admire the sense of calm. Like your sense of calm is something that I'm very very impressed with, and I want to pull as much into that, because I'm just kind of a high functioning ball of anxiety. But I'm a kind of random question. What is your morning routine? I'm just curious. Like, what does your morning routine look like?
Yeah, I try my alarm. I try to wake up at 6:30 every day, even on the weekends. I guess I'm more of a morning person. That's what my aura ring tells me. Um, I wake up at 6:30. My phone is always outside the room. I actually hate it when I'm in the hotel and I have to keep my phone next to me because I'm such an addict for picking it up and like opening up my email app or Slack or something, right? Like I just that's a problem I have. I can't not do that. So I
Yeah,
keep my phone outside. Then the first thing I'll usually do is actually read, like for 5 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes. I keep my Kindle right next to me, and I'll open up some sort of a philosophical reading. Right, it could be like Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Ryan Holiday has this thing called like the Daily Stoic, which is cool. It's like 2 pages.
hmm,
He has a verse from Seneca or from Marcus Aurelius, and it just makes you think. Right, there's
yeah,
nothing scientific about it. It's just kind of like, sometimes it's like be a good person today, and it's like cool, awesome, great, right? You kind of like you start your day off with like a little bit of a sentiment there, um,
yeah,
and then straight after that, I'll actually do 30 minutes of meditation, a combined breathing practice plus sitting in silence, and then I touch my phone. So that's like
yeah,
after basically an hour, will I get up? I'll pop on my phone, and the first thing I always do is open up my email, which is not the smartest thing, but whatever. I have that itch, and I need to scratch it.
yeah.
And then I make a little bit of breakfast, a coffee, and then I head into work. And so, yeah.
Nice. I like it. There's my sister actually does this thing where she keeps the phone out of the room, and I always call her crazy for it. I'm like, what if an emergency happens? And it's just like, oh, I mean, people will find you.
Well,
It's not the end of the world.
if it does, it also does. My phone's on do not disturb and silent, and so they wouldn't, honestly, if I think whatever it is, if your favorites ring you 3 times or something like that, my phone will go
Yeah,
off anyways. If it's out there, I'll still hear it, right? It's gonna go
yeah,
off, and I'll pick it up. But yeah,
yeah. But no, I like that. I'm also I'm also a morning person, so on any given, even the weekends, as long as I didn't go to bed super late, 7 a.m. My eyes have opened.
yeah,
they
yeah,
have at least opened. Sometimes I force
yeah,
myself to go back to sleep, but like by
sure,
7, I've unfortunately touched that phone once, probably.
yeah, yeah. I
Cool, man.
also,
Okay.
there's a bit of what you allow to control your morning, right? Like I
Mhm.
said, I open up my email every morning. There is no amount of self control that I have over the subscriptions that I get, right? The subscriptions will fire that night. I'm going to have, 10 emails or whatever from these subscriptions. Substack
Yeah,
will send me my 5 or 6 notices. You might email me to, the day before, like, hey, reminder that we have our podcast tomorrow. Like, do I need to, at the first thing in the morning, like read these 30 things and have the world dictate the way that my day should go? Or can I start it the way that I want to? Right. That's kind of
mm,
the question that I've asked. And that's why I leave my phone out there. And granted, if there's an emergency, somebody will call, my mom and dad will call, the phone will ring because I have that setting on there. And I'll figure
right.
that out. But, on a recurring basis, I don't want the world to dictate how I start my day. And I'd rather, have that limited amount of control to start it myself. And so
Yeah,
yeah,
that's a really wise way to think about it. That is a really good way to think about it. All of these things are um, outside of your control. And do you want to start your day off with I don't have control of my day anymore because I've got to do these 7 things that someone else has put on my plate. It's
exactly.
a really smart way to think about it.
And you can't stop your brain from having these internal loops. As soon as I see that email, regardless of what
Yeah,
it is, I'm going to start thinking about Apple's new VR thing because Product Hunt emailed me. I'm going to start thinking about the podcast I'm going to be on because you emailed me, right? Like it
yeah,
I don't get that time to breathe in the morning to be like, what really are my priorities? Like, what do I want to do today? But now I've
yeah,
started thinking about all this other stuff that's filled my brain and put opened up Chrome tabs in my own head that I never really had control of. And so I
yeah,
always want to start. I have 27 tabs open on my Chrome too, but I'd love to start with a fresh slate every morning at least.
yeah, yeah. There's there's one thing that I've been trying to do over the years. I used Todoist for kind of all of my to-do lists, and I kind of organized my entire life on it. I'm trying to get in a better habit of the night before determining what I want my next day to look like. Okay, these are my priorities. These are the things.
Yeah,
So that even when I do wake up and I see the emails, I now have to figure out how to slot those things into what I've already told myself I'm going to do. So,
entirely.
um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's something I'm probably going to try to work to have a little bit more discipline in because I like the idea of controlling what I want to do in the day rather than being very reactive to it.
hmm Yeah. And it's funny, it'll open up so much quote unquote free time or focus time for you when you flip the day like that.
Yeah,
Not to say that you're not going to answer emails or finish up the work that you need to get done, but you'll just do it within the context of you knowing what you want to do, right? So then you also just feel better and feel more accomplished at the end of the day because you're like, I tick that 1 to 2 things off, as well as a bunch of other work
yeah,
before I fall asleep tonight.
yeah, absolutely. So as we start kind of wrapping up, I did want to ask one question of what advice would you give other entrepreneurs who are considering not just starting a company, but building a product, a hardware product that, similar into your case, wasn't out there already, or there was something out there, but it was it was so far from the quality or the standard that they wanted to achieve. What advice would you give them starting out?
The first thing I would do is take out a sheet of paper and write your product idea on the top, right? In my case, I would say a swimming pool robot that measures water chemistry. That inherently, the second line I would do is figure out what problem that solves, right? For the customer. Is it people need to test their pool, and if they don't, they get green algae and they're swimming in a cesspool of mosquitoes and a bunch of nasty stuff, right? With that being said, I would take that second line, I would fold my solution on the other side so I don't see it, and then I would try to find 15 people, 20 people. As scary as that sounds, face to face. Like, don't do a video conference, don't do a phone call if you're able to. Sit down with them, buy them a coffee, go visit them at their home, go to their office, whatever your product is. In my case, I would walk with them in their backyard and I would ask them, how do you test your pool? I want to see it.
Hmm.
I'm not going to pitch my idea. I don't forget that I'm even here as an entrepreneur. How do you test your pool? Right. And then follow them, watch them as they take that test kit that has cobwebs on them, sitting out in the sun that's bleached. Open up that test kit and have no more liquid inside there. And then go to the pool and take a sample of water where they shouldn't take a sample of water. Watch them as they look at the colors and they can't really see what the colors are. Understand when they pull out a big sheet of a bunch of formulas and try to figure out what the chemistry is. Don't talk. Don't like try to pitch your idea at that point in time. Just watch them, listen to them. Say,
Yeah.
do you know what the colors are on that little test strip? It doesn't work, does it? Do that 15 times and internalize the information that these customers have, and write it on that same piece of paper. Open up that flap that you turned over and make sure that that thing that you're going to build is actually solving the problems that you've seen in those 15 people, and then go
Yeah.
ahead and build it. But if you're going to take your first step without even talking to a customer to see what their actual problem is, then you're just building it and hoping that they're going to come.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. That's incredibly wise and great wisdom. And I can see that that applies beyond the hardware. I think about the conversations I had with folks before starting Yensel, like, okay, you need this spreadsheet. What do you do? Oh, well, I Google it. I think I actually, ironically, I think I asked 5 or 6 people and like family and close friends, hey, go find this document.
Yeah.
And like, or tell me something that you've needed over the last, I think that's what it was. They said, tell me something that you needed over the last week. And people came back. It's like, oh, I needed this thing for my kid, or I needed this spreadsheet for this trip that I'm building. And then I was like, okay, how did you get it? And I basically collected an inventory of the ways that people would do it.
Yeah.
And probably more subjectively, I said, that's inefficient. That's inefficient. That's inefficient.
Sure. Yeah,
And
exactly.
so, yeah, so I really like that process.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get to some concluding questions. Excuse me. What misconceptions did you have about entrepreneurship before you started?
Um, the financial Excel sheet, like literally when you're first building this model, every single VC asks you for this thing, and all of those assumptions are wrong, right? You're like, I'm gonna 10x volume, and my costs are gonna be 5x, and all this stuff. That financial Excel sheet is like the biggest misconception of what I think is gonna happen in the business and what actually doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So I got a lot better at finance, but that Excel sheet, I would say.
So I've heard this a number of times, and um, as someone who loves spreadsheets and tries to be as conservative as possible and make sure that it isn't always just up and to the right, I guess my question is, how do you still gain value out of that spreadsheet, knowing it's going to be wrong? Like, from your perspective, what value does that spreadsheet actually provide knowing that all of your assumptions are inaccurate?
Zooming into the spreadsheet, right? So if you make a 5-year model, you'll have a very high probability that it's probably not right. If you have a year model, probably a little bit better in terms of probability. If you have a weekly model, you're getting a lot cleaner on being able to pivot and make decisions such that you can actually hit that year benchmark. And so what I would say from the Excel sheet standpoint is figure out your KPIs, figure out what's important, figure out the OKRs, right, the objectives and the key results. What do I want to get to in this year? Break it down again into these weekly, or whatever time segment is right for you. And if you can see things at a smaller scale, you're able to pivot a lot more. You're able to make decisions at a much quicker basis, right? Your feedback loop is quicker.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the Excel sheet makes sense. I know some people will be like, man, so you want me to like analyze entire financial spreadsheets over the course of every single week? No, pick your 5 to 7 metrics that you know are going to be levers and volume buttons to make sure that you can actually get to that North Star that you're trying to get to. Not to say you shouldn't have a 5-year plan. By all means, have it. But if you spend 90% of your time on building a 5-year model, your just general probability of achieving it is probably going to be lower than you would on a weekly level because you're able to think in terms of weeks and days, not necessarily
Yeah.
in terms of years.
Yeah. No, that's really good advice. Um, okay, what book or books would you recommend to other entrepreneurs? And it'll be added to our library that's on our site for other entrepreneurs.
Um, I would recommend. Actually, I would recommend Harry Potter. And the
Ooh,
reason that I
okay.
say Harry Potter for entrepreneurs is because your number one goal is to be a storyteller, right? You're raising something out of the grave that has never existed before. You're building something that's completely fresh. And the way to do that is to convince people, to tell really, really good stories that make sense. And that goes back to the problem solution matrix, all of the stuff that we talked about during the pod. And J.K. Rowling is an amazing storyteller, right?
Yeah.
She has amazing character development. She really makes you feel like the emotion behind the things that are happening with Harry and Hermione. Um, read really really good stories. Read sci-fi. I've gotten a lot into the just go to the Hugo Awards. It's like the sci-fi award thing, and pick like a handful. Go to Amazon and pick a handful of books that interest you, and read a science fiction novel because it places a version of reality that's in the future that doesn't exist today by somebody that has a science background, right? For those engineers that want to get sciencey about fiction and don't want something that's super fantasy. So those
Yeah.
are those are two things that I would recommend, or two books, or two styles of books: Harry Potter and read a science fiction novel.
I like that. I like that. It's a very unique answer. Um, but I think you hit on such a really good point that it is all about storytelling, and a lot of times the best way to learn is to like just be a little askew to what you're focusing on because it'll get you thinking about your problem statement a little bit differently. So I really like that. Okay, my second to last question. What question do you think I should ask the next guest?
Question: do I think you should ask the next guest? Who demographically will the next guest be? Another entrepreneur?
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
Okay.
Just what question would you want them to answer?
Um, I think a really interesting question is the earliest memory you can remember when you were growing up that
Ooh,
has had like a profound impact, or that you like remember enough that has probably shaped a little bit of what you're thinking about today.
yeah. Okay, now you have to tell me about your earliest memory that shaped the impact of what you're doing today. It's the trick I get every guest with.
Yeah. Um, I think the earliest memory that I just probably can remember is actually what I started off with, like building these Lego cities with my grandfather. I think I was like 7 maybe, or 8. I don't know. I don't remember how early I remember back, but like it was prior to 10, or 10 years old. And I just remember going. I remember I had my cousin's Lego hand-me-downs, right? So I had like thousands of pieces, and I built this entire city on probably like a 10 by 10 room that we had in the back. That was kind of a like a shed area, sort of. It was covered,
Mm-hmm.
and I realized that the Legos were not didn't have enough high fidelity for me to build the city. And so I just remember going to like Michael's, the arts and crafts store,
Yeah.
with my grandfather, and I picked up things that I could like add to the Lego city. So I remember picking up like little palm trees and little like people and stuff like that, just because I wanted to give a different feeling to this Lego city than the Legos were giving me at this point in time. And so that's kind of it's kind of what I remember as the earliest memory.
I like it. This might be one of my new concluding questions because I think it does put an interesting bow on the conversation because it does tie right back to what you said. And I'm sitting here thinking about what my earliest memory was. Um, I'd have to think more about it, but the one that stands out to me in my head was I remember when Magic Johnson was in the news because he was opening movie theaters.
Hmm.
And it was kind of like the beginning of his like business empire. And I remember saying, I'm going to make the NBA, but I'm also going to be a businessman. I'm going to own a business and I'm going to run a business. And as my hoop dreams faded, every job I walked into, I thought about it from the lens of how is this going to make me a better entrepreneur in the future? So when I went into consulting, I walked in thinking, my job here is to understand how this consulting business works because I'm going to have my own consulting business in the future. Um, and it was fascinating because I never really knew what my business would be. I just knew I would
Mhm.
own a business. And so you're
Huh.
right. There is something about that very early memory that does have this through line to how you approach a lot of things. I think that's a really great question.
Yeah, that's interesting. Really, really interesting memory.
Yeah. Yeah. I was in my cul-de-sac. We had a little cul-de-sac and um, we used to use the sewer top as the hoop.
Okay.
So we would all just kind of like be shooting. I just remember being in that in the cul-de-sac and just kind of thinking like, holy crap, I'm going to be the next Michael Jordan and I'm going to have a business empire as big as Magic Johnson.
Interesting. Huh.
Yeah. All right. Well, my final question is, Ravi, tell folks how they can learn more about you, learn more about Sutro, and get connected.
Yeah. You can go to mysutro.com. That's mysutro.com. That's where we have all the information on Sutro. If you want to find out more about me, you can go on my LinkedIn. It's pretty well stocked with everything I'm up to. I'm also in the midst of starting a podcast myself. And so if you want to learn more about that, my podcast is called Liquid Assets, the business of water. And so you can just go to liquidassets.cc to find out more. But those are three ways that you can get a hold of me.
That's awesome. Ravi, this has been incredible. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here, man. This was awesome.
All right. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed our interview with Ravi Kurani of Sutro. This wraps up season 6, which is kind of crazy to say. Gearing up for season 7, we have a series of entrepreneurs that are just phenomenal. I'm excited for you guys to hear their story. As we wrap up this season, I did want to give a quick update and exciting news about our website. If you are podcast shy or camera shy, but you still have an incredible entrepreneurial story that you want to share, we have a written interview platform on our website. So go check out the stories that are there now. And please, please, please go ahead and submit your story so we can promote your business and also just share your story so that all of us as entrepreneurs can learn from each other. I think that's the main reason why we started this podcast and we created this platform. So just so excited to see and hear the incredible stories that come through on that platform because unfortunately I am unable to interview everyone. Another awesome thing on the website that you may not know about is we have a book club. We actually just launched a book club this summer as part of the library that lives within the website. For every guest that's ever come on the podcast, as you guys know, we ask them for book recommendations. Those recommendations live on our website in what we call the Entrepreneur's Library. And now you can actually join our book club. And so every month within our Facebook group, we are going to be promoting and discussing a book that has been recommended on the podcast. And it's just another opportunity for entrepreneurs to connect and share lessons learned and help each other out. So thank you for tuning in. That's a wrap for season 6. And next week, we're going to kick off season 7 with guest number 37. All right. Talk to you later.